Alright, so today on the bench I have this super cool Sony TC-K71 cassette deck from 1980. This is not my cassette deck, but a friend of mine's. And he came about getting this because he was originally looking for a later 70s silver face style Sony TC-K60. And finding those, they're a little pricey on eBay. But this one's from 1980, and the aesthetic was close enough, and I saw the ad on Facebook Marketplace and sent it to him. I said, hey, look, check this one out, it's really good. It kind of goes with what you were looking for. It's a little bit newer, but I think it's still close enough. Sure enough, he checked it out and kind of fell in love with it. Went over to the owner, and the owner was the original first owner. Bought it new in 1980. As a matter of fact, the guy even had the original owner's manual, gave it to him, and they even plugged it in, put a tape in, everything lit up, everything worked. But I said, hey, let's just change those belts out because they're 40 years old. That's just what belts do. So he bought the belt pack. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna change the belts out on a Sony TC-K71.
So the good thing about this video is that I didn't find a lot of, or any videos really, of this cassette deck having the belts replaced at all online. So that's the good news. I kind of have a unique video here. But the problem with that is that I didn't really know how to open this up and get to the belts. And as you'll see here real quick, I'm showing you, you don't even need to do any of this. I had this thing almost completely apart until I kind of figured out finally how to get to the belts, and it's way easier than this. So you don't have to remove the front, you don't have to remove the bottom. So let me just cut to the chase for you. So to get to the belts on the inside, there are 3 screws on the left and 3 screws on the right. Simply unscrew them, and that is what is going to give you access to the top cover, and you just slide it off and back like this. Now after I removed the top cover, I noticed there was a date stamp on the inside here, so let me show you what it says. Manufacture date here says, it looks like that is the 28th of June 1980. So here are the first 2 screws that you'll need to remove to gain access to the motor and flywheels and belts, and there are 3 inside this area here. Now you can pull this shield away, and it's basically wedged between the chassis and the tape mechanism itself, and that exposes the next set of screws to remove. So at first I tried to remove it from where I was standing, but because I had all the lights and the way the camera was set up, it was actually easier if I just came on the other side of the table. So you can do what you need to do, of course, here, but that's the only reason I traded spots. So once I got this second screw out, you'll see that everything started to get loosened up here, and it took me a moment to figure out kind of how to position this, and there you can kind of see the belt, one of the belts in there. But this is how I ended up having to move it to be able to work on it. But before I start moving everything out of the way, I want you to take notice of this thing right here. This is where the final belt will actually go on in here when we're all done, and it will be kind of assembled when we put it on. I just wanted to mention it before I moved it out of the way because we're going to get to these flat belts on the inside. But first we do have to remove one more screw, and that is right here. And another quick reminder, obviously you can see the table beneath my hands there. That was because I erroneously removed the bottom of it, so just remember that you don't have to do that. And here you can see me swinging that arm out of the way. That's all you have to do here, and of course that gives us access to be able to replace these belts. So once you remove all the belts, kind of take note of the routing and the which way you kind of remove them, because it's going to be helpful when you go to get it back in here. In this case I started with the belt that's kind of underneath and then the back on the big one, and it goes between the wheels first, and then you'll see how it kind of snakes around and goes on the back of that bottom wheel. Not the greatest camera angle, but I did the best I could. But also note that if your belts are in really bad condition, you're going to have to clean it here. I didn't really have to do too much. They actually came out really nicely, which I was surprised at having a cassette deck this old. But even just take a Q-tip with some like isopropyl alcohol or something if you want to, just to clean everything up, which always makes things nicer. Now sometimes when you're doing belts, you just have to find the best way to get these things on the wheels. And in this case, after a couple tries, this is what I finally ended up working for me on this front one here. I started putting it on that one on the right first, and kind of going around and then stretching it around the one on the left. That seemed to be the thing. As you can see, it kind of took there. and then I just kind of moved it by hand to make sure it was, on there. But that's how that one worked for me. Now I also wanted to mention here, before I kind of put this bottom part back screwed in, I'm actually adding the belt and just resting it here. So after I close it up and start to bring everything together, you'll see how it all fits together, but just remember to put that belt there before you get things back into place. Now once I finished screwing this bottom part back in, I ensured that everything was still in the same spots that I left them. The belts were still kind of where I originally put them, and I also opened the eject door just to make sure that I didn't mess up any gears or anything. You'll see it open and close there. Just want to make sure I got it all back together right before I started doing the final belts around the pulleys. So now is a bit of a trickier part. I'm bringing the upper motor section here, and I'm going to kind of hold it in place while I bring in the two belts that need to be placed onto here. The first one is going to be that flat belt that I kind of put in there first, and that's going to be pulled. You'll see I'm going to pull it up here over and put it kind of in the back of the motor, and then just move it, make sure I got it in the right. You'll see I kind of move it with my finger there. So that's that one right there. So to make the small belt go on easiest, I found that if I returned and screwed back in the motor where it goes, that's when it's already kind of stable and in place. Again, looking down and making sure the belts that you originally put on are staying in place. Once you do that, screw these back in, and you'll see here I'm going to get this small front belt way easier. So I found this worked a lot better if I used a tweezer for the front part and a screwdriver for the back. Now be careful not to gouge the belt, and I wasn't doing anything other than just holding it in place with the screwdriver. But once you see, once the screwdriver kind of has it lined up in the back, in the ridge where it's supposed to go, then I was able to use the tweezers and just guide it onto the front part of the motor. So here's a flyover of how these are supposed to be routed. So if you didn't take any pictures when you were doing it, this is what it should look like before you start to close up the back here. Now it's time to replace that little motor cover, and don't forget it goes in between the chassis and the top part of the lid, and the screws should line up. Then just screw them back in. And don't forget you can also put the cover back on at this point. I thought I was done until I realized there was a belt left over, and at first I was like, oh, they must have given me an extra belt. And then I realized, no, they wouldn't do that. So where does this belt go? And then I figured it out. It goes for the tape counter. Now this one took me the longest to figure out, but I will take what took about 40 minutes of me figuring out how to get this thing out, and I'm going to bring it down to about a minute for you. So there are two screws that are on the inside of this, and you can see how I'm getting to them very delicately in there. I need to use a tweezer so it doesn't fall in between, but these are the two that are on the upper end when you do the eject. So remove these two screws here, and then this back plate has to come out, and I ended up using the tweezers here, even though I was trying to move it with my finger and get it to kind of come out. I used the tweezer, it eventually came out here, you'll see. And this of course will let you gain access to the final belt, but this is the hardest one out of all of them. You can see the belt there. This is really difficult, and I'll show you what I ended up having to do. So turn the unit like this, and if you look in there, and I can't even get really good pictures of it the way I did this, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. Remove the old belt. If you look in there, you'll be able to see how it goes down and around the gear that runs the counter. So remove the old belt, fish the new one down there around the gear that moves the counter, then you can bring it up and put it around the gear that moves the tape mechanism, and that's how you do this. Now it's time to replace that plate in those two screws, and I decided to be smart and use gravity to assist me so I didn't lose those screws within the unit. So I laid it down on its back like this and lined it up and just screwed those screws back in. Now when I first had this thing apart, I decided to go ahead and clean off all the heads and some of the insides. So even though it will look a little out of sequence, because you could see here that I have the front cover off, really I'm doing this video in the order that you should do it in. So do the belts first the way I showed you, and then just take some isopropyl alcohol and just start cleaning the heads. Of course, if you had a demagnetizer, that would be great too. This was a one-owner unit. It was in fantastic condition, so I felt pretty good about just taking alcohol over all these heads and cleaning them up here, as you can see. And while I was at it, I, of course, took the time to clean the front of the whole unit, really, but, of course, where everybody's hands and fingerprints are on the front. Took a Q-tip with alcohol into everything. And I also used some deoxit and sprayed that on a Q-tip and put that into some of the input jacks, like the headphone and microphone. Again, just to clean it. It's been a while since, it's a 40-year-old deck. So I'm sure it needed it. But yeah, I took the time to clean really the whole thing. All right, now that it's all cleaned up and looking beautiful, before I plugged this into the main stereo and plugged it into anything audio-wise, I just wanted to put a tape in here to see if it turned on, if it worked, if the lights, the LEDs were lighting up, if the counter was moving. It looks really good here. So now I'm going to take the time and hook it up to the stereo to hear how it sounds finally. And here's the moment of truth. I wish I could play more, but I do hope that snippet of sound was enough for you to kind of get just how awesome this tape deck is for being 40 years old and in just fantastic condition. New belts, you clean it up, somebody takes care of it for a long time. These things are built to last. So anyway, that is the repair of the TC-K71 tape deck.